going to just go ahead and dive in and start explaining that concept, Jonathan.
It's a big part of how Wall Street's been running us into a ditch for the last 30
The debt ceiling is not some sort of macroeconomic concept.
The U.S. isn't really a great place, and it's not really the land of the free.
Get 1,000 people together and let's go lay siege to City Hall.
Hello to all of the real progressives out there. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I apologize the show is a little bit later than usual. That is due to my work schedule. Hoping to get back to that regular time going forward, but I appreciate any of you who found time to tune in later in the evening. We're going to keep it a little bit short and sweet out of courtesy to the viewer, especially those on the East Coast tonight, but we do, I think, have a fantastic show for you. I want to start with the RP plugs as usual. Go to realprogressives.org to learn more about us. Or help us out, donate, become a volunteer, realprogressives.org/donate to become a regular contributor. We are a nonprofit and we appreciate any help that you can provide. Make sure you're not missing any of our content on this YouTube channel. Hit like and subscribe, please. I often forget to say this at the start of the show. Please hit like and subscribe. It helps us with the algorithms. Leave a comment and share as widely as you can. Word of mouth also helps if you can help us get the content out there to combat those algorithms, which are none too friendly to progressive outlets like Real Progressives. Don't miss any of our content. You can go to realprogressives.org. Great articles, great podcasts from the Macro and Cheese podcast with our founder and CEO Steve Grumbine to his show The Rogue Scholar on this YouTube channel, to a very exciting announcement I want to share with you all. Tomorrow we are bringing back Savage Joy. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Joy from the March for Medicare for All and her YouTube channel, but she's going to be doing a weekly show with us. Oh, whoops, hit home there. Here we go. A weekly show with us on Mondays. So here's her tweet. She says she's back tomorrow night, 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Will be post-mortem breakdowns for show exclusively on RP in Action. And a reminder that her other shows will remain on her other channel, but she'll be doing a weekly show on RPIA. So I encourage everybody to tune in tomorrow evening for Joy and Andrew. All right, guys, so let's dive in. We have a pretty sad story to start with, unfortunately, today, and it's a continuation of something that we've been covering on and off for months now, ever since Joe Biden pulled out of Afghanistan. So this is on reliefweb.int. They say WFP Afghanistan Situation Report from the 15th of August. In numbers, 18.9 million people, nearly half of the population, are estimated to be acutely food insecure between June and November 2022. 4.7 million children, pregnant and lactating women at risk of acute malnutrition in 2022. 3.9 million children are acutely malnourished. All 34 provinces are facing crisis or emergency levels of acute food insecurity. This obviously due to the actions taken by the United States government. And I think it's I think it's overwhelmingly hypocritical to, I give credit where I think it's due. I do think pulling out of Afghanistan was a good thing. But to then turn around and effectively starve half of their population seems quite a contrary, or a rather contradictory message. And the other sort of hypocrisy there is, listen, you guys, I'll speak for myself, rather. No, I don't want the Taliban to be any more powerful than they are. I don't like seeing them having control over people's lives. I don't think a right-wing theocratic ideology is healthy for human relations and for society. I do not support the Taliban, right? That's a separate question from should we be militaristically involved in Afghanistan. So the pullout was effectively, with our actions, saying, while we don't support the Taliban, we understand and recognize they're obviously going to take over Afghanistan, right? And yet now we turn around and we use as an excuse to refuse to provide these funds that we don't want to fund the Taliban. So on one hand, we're doing the right thing by, taking our nose out of business. Now, I also want to be clear, we're still undoubtedly engaged in intelligence and nefarious other things in not just the region, but Afghanistan specifically. But the pullout itself is like a small good step, right? So with that action, we send the message that while we understand there are bad actors in the world, we're not going to continue to try to control that situation, right? And yet now we're turning around and saying, but we're going to starve half of their population because we don't want to empower the Taliban. It just seems a completely hypocritical, contradictory message. And obviously, you guys, feeding innocent civilians, providing the means for food to people is not funding terrorism in any way, shape, or form. And, you know, I think those people should be able to hold both of those things in their head at the same time, right? I think this is an absolutely devastating story, and I wish it was getting more attention. The magnitude of it, those numbers are insane. They're off the charts. Half of the population, you guys, children, pregnant women, starving and dealing with malnutrition, half the country food insecure. I mean, it's just absolutely, utterly insane. So I wish this was getting more attention. I hope that there is some pressure put on the Biden administration to do the right thing here, but it sure doesn't look like we're headed in that direction, unfortunately. In a somewhat oddly similar story, although vastly different details, and it's in the United States, there has been a study that found a whole lot of baby food is toxic. Now, this pairs back to a study that we covered months ago as well, but the update here is that even baby food made at home seems to have these toxic metals in it. We'll get into these details here. This is by Kenny Stansel and Common Dreams. 94% of prepackaged and homemade U.S. baby foods contain toxic heavy metals, according to a study. Quote, FDA must go beyond the baby food aisle and get strong standards for these contaminants, said the National Director of Healthy Babies' Bright Future. Almost all of the baby foods that parents in the United States feed their children, whether purchased at the store or prepared at home, contain detectable amounts of toxic heavy metals that can impair brain development, according to new research published Thursday, which led to renewed demands for improved regulation. A previous study by Healthy Babies' Bright Futures found that 95% of prepackaged baby foods tested were contaminated with toxic heavy metals, including lead, arsenic, cadmium, and mercury, sparking a congressional investigation and conversations about whether homemade baby foods are a safer alternative. In an effort, quote, to determine if homemade purees and foods purchased outside the baby food aisle have lower heavy metal levels than pre-made store-bought baby food, the donor-funded Alliance of Scientists and nonprofits recently tested 288 foods and examined more than 7,000 additional food tests from published studies. HBBF found no evidence to suggest that homemade baby food has lower heavy metal levels than store-bought brands. Lead author Jane Houlihan, the Alliance's research director, and Charlotte Brody, its national director, wrote in their newly released report. Quote, heavy metal levels varied widely by food type, not by who made the food, notes the analysis from HBBF, which seeks to reduce infants' exposure to damaged neurotoxins. Key findings include 94% of all food samples we tested contained detectable amounts of toxic heavy metals, 94% of store-bought baby food, and 94% of homemade purees and family brand foods. Rice cakes and crisped rice cereal are heavily contaminated with arsenic. They contain higher levels of inorganic arsenic, the toxic form of arsenic, than any other foods tested. Both stand out as foods to avoid for children and adults alike. Lead, arsenic, and cadmium levels are high in some fresh carrots and sweet potatoes. We recommend that parents vary the source by choosing from different brands, varieties, or stores each week to avoid accidentally serving a high metal source often. The 10 most heavily contaminated foods consumed by babies, beginning with the highest, are rice cakes, crisp rice cereal, rice-based puffs, brown rice, rice-based teething biscuits and rusks, white rice, raisins, teething crackers, non-rice, granola bar with raisins, and oat ring cereal. The 10 least contaminated foods consumed by babies, beginning with the lowest, are bananas, grits, baby food brand meats, butternut squash, lamb, apples, pork, eggs, or oranges, and watermelon. I know that was a little bit tedious with the details, you guys, but I kind of felt it was important for any potential parents out there and for people that just want to avoid ingesting arsenic and cadmium, for Christ's fucking sake. But this is an absolutely devastating story, you guys. I mean, this affects brain development. It affects the health of the rest of the body, I have to presume. I mean, I'm not a doctor. I can't imagine arsenic is good for your other organs. So this is absolutely devastating, and the fact that it's specific to baby food in particular, right? I think we as a society kind of, in some sense, acknowledge the importance of children and that they're our future, and that we don't want to screw up generations with stuff like toxic baby food. So absolutely devastating story, and I hope that there are further regulations on not just the store-bought baby food, but on the ingredients that are often used for homemade or puree sourced baby food. So that's, I mean, again, I'm not naive enough to expect that, you guys. I understand who is currently running our government, but that's the kind of devastating story that I feel like people should be aware of, and take whatever actions you feel is most responsible for you and your loved ones. And I sure hope that we take the appropriate actions as a society going forward from a legal sense, or from a congressional sense, a regulatory sense. All right. So I want to talk a little bit more. We covered last week the passing of the, quote, Inflation Reduction Act. And there's been some further details that have come out that sort of speak to the process by which that bill was crafted. So I want to show you guys a clip here. This is David Sirota of The Lever. He went on Breaking Points, and I thought gave a very good breakdown of, I'm sorry, just a second here. I got to figure out how I'm sharing this. A breakdown of the process that this, the negotiation process of this bill. Okay. Share with audio. Okay. Anyway, David Sirota on Breaking Points. This was a conversation he had with Crystal Ball, and I thought it went into these details and covered things quite nicely. So we'll watch this, come back, and discuss.
Time now for our weekly partnership segment with our friends over at The Lever. And joining us this week is the man himself, David Sirota. Great to see you, David.
Good to see you too.
So you have a look this week at the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which was signed into law by Joe Biden this week. And let's go ahead and put your tear sheet up on the screen here. You're focused in particular on some of the major blatant Wall Street giveaways that ended up in the final package. You say the Wall Street vote that screamed the quiet part out loud. Senators gave their Wall Street donors another gift after blocking the expanded child tax credit. Before we dig into the specifics of Ms. Sinema and her allies here, though, I would love for you, David, because we haven't heard your view on the show yet, just to give your overall view of this package and, the end result and whether it was worth voting for in your estimation.
I think it's hard to know whether this bill will do more good than harm. I think if you force me to answer whether it does, I guess there's a decent chance that this bill marginally improves the climate situation, marginally reduces emissions. It was sold as a bill to reduce 40% of emissions. That's not actually what it does. It adds at best another 10% of emissions reductions. The current policy gets about 30% of emissions reductions, according to the same estimates. So a marginal reduction in emissions if everything goes right, and that's the big if. When making a climate bill, attaching to a climate bill a vast expansion of fossil fuel development, you are inherently creating a gamble on the climate. You are putting good investments into renewable energy, but then tying those investments effectively to a potential expansion of oil and gas leasing in the future. And so that's a huge roll of the dice. Yes, maybe the renewable energy stuff takes and outpaces the fossil fuel development. That's a win for the climate. An alternate scenario is the renewable energy stuff doesn't take. The oil and gas industry exploits the new leases, the expansion of leases in this bill, and that's not a win for the climate. So I think what happened here was the Democratic Party decided to cut a big giant check to every part of the energy economy because they didn't want to make a choice. They didn't want to create an enemy out of the oil industry. This is why the oil industry celebrated the passage of the bill. And that was their political formula. But science is telling us we need to stop all new fossil fuel development if we have a chance to really deal with the climate stuff, the climate crisis. So to my mind, again, a big gamble. Now, on the other side of this, the sort of social policy side of this, I think there was great investments in IRS enforcement that were long overdue. I think they unfortunately very seriously watered down the Medicare prescription drug pricing stuff. There's still a couple of good things in there, but they seriously watered it down. And then they included some real tax giveaways to Wall Street in this bill.
Well, and that's a great transition because you can see the fingerprints of corporate America on every single piece of this legislation. I agree with you on balance. I think it was better than doing nothing. I think it's a marginal benefit. And so, I don't want to say otherwise, but you see it certainly in the approach to climate. You see it in the approach to healthcare, which ends up getting watered down. And then you see it in these tax provisions. So let's talk about that piece because this was extremely blatant and you picked up on a real asymmetry here. So when Senator Sanders was saying, hey guys, all 50 of you claim to be in support of a child tax credit. Why don't we add that to the bill? He was voted down. I think this is one of the ones where he was voted down 99-1 on something that they allegedly all care about. And the argument from Senator Sherrod Brown, supposedly a progressive, and others was, Bernie, we have to stay unified. This will, for some reason, tank the bill, so we can't vote with you on these things. However, when it came to Kyrsten Sinema and her being like, no, we can't close the carried interest loophole, and actually I want these other giveaways for Wall Street put into the bill, then they were willing to get on board and go along with that. Break down how all of that went down for us, David.
Sure. So the Democratic leadership, as you said, enforced party unity against Bernie Sanders' series of amendments that were designed to add back into the bill Democratic Party priorities. One of the big ones was the expanded child tax credit. He put an amendment on the floor. The Democratic leadership, the Democratic senators joined with the Republicans to vote that down. And as you said, the Democratic leadership said we have to preserve the integrity of this fragile deal. This legislation represents a very fragile deal. And even though we may supposedly want to do this good thing, expand the child tax, reinstate the expanded child tax credit, we can't do that because we have to preserve this fragile balance. They voted that down. And then a few hours later, they joined with Sinema and Republicans to add into the bill, and I should mention, it wasn't all the Democrats, it was 7 Democrats, so party unity not enforced. 7 Democrats joined with the Republicans to add into the bill a $35 billion tax break for the private equity industry. It basically said that the private equity industry, in facing the new corporate minimum tax, doesn't have to effectively tally the revenues of its portfolio companies in deciding or in terms of whether it qualifies and faces that tax. So basically, it creates a special carve out for the private equity industry that has dumped $250 million of campaign contributions into the federal political process in the last 2 election cycles. So a blatant and naked giveaway to the donor class hours after the same Senate voted down an expansion of the wildly popular child tax credit.
And Kyrsten Sinema obviously sort of led the charge on this. I mean, how much money has she personally gotten from private equity? I know oftentimes the media likes to paint her and Joe Manchin as like acting in their state's best interest, and that's what they really care about. Arizona not known as like a hotbed of private equity activity here. So she's just, I rarely do you see such a blatant quid pro quo, even though they're there all the time, as was on evidence here. Larry Summers even was like, wow, this is gross even by my standards.
Yes. I mean, look, the Associated Press reported about $1 million of campaign contributions from the private equity industry flowed into her campaign in the lead up to this, into the lead up of the negotiations over this bill. Sinema obviously working for her private equity donors. There's just really no pretense here. By the way, there's no pretense with Joe Manchin either, the top recipient of oil and gas money, adding in the oil and gas giveaways in this bill. I mean, one thing we can say is we are living in an era where the corrupt folks in Washington have stopped really trying to pretend like they're not corrupt, right? I mean, it's just out in the open. And in some ways that makes it easier to report on. It's easier to see. But I think what it's kind of an admission of is that corruption is now so normalized, so accepted, so part of the process out in the open that these legislators don't even feel a deterrent in terms of the optics of it. They are just doing the bidding of their donors. There's no other way to put it.
It's literally shameless. Like they literally can't be shamed.
Have no shame. They cannot be shamed.
Do not care. The thing that, to me, I mean, listen, I guess encouraged that something got through, right? And I think all the histrionics are historic and it's landmark and whatever is obviously dramatically overstated, but it was encouraging that something happened. However, on the other hand, I look at it, and because it is so clear how it was curtailed at every turn and watered down at every turn by corporate America, it also really demonstrates how constrained our political system is as long as big money is so dominant. Like, you may want Medicare to negotiate on prescription drug prices, but they're like, yeah, well, maybe we'll give you a few drugs, maybe a few years down the road. You may want Medicare for all, but they're like, how about we just keep some little bit of extra Affordable Care Act subsidies in here? It's all what corporate America is willing to tolerate, to, all the way to the point of the oil and gas companies they were cool with this bill. They were celebrating it. So what does it say at a larger scale about what is possible in our politics with our current political system?
You are touching on such an important point here, which is that I think this bill is another example of the political paradigm of the best that you can hope for in our current politics are policies that do not make a choice. Now, the good side of that, the best side of that is you can get good things funded, right? You can get investments, for instance, in renewable energy, things that do not have a natural opposition. You can get those things funded. But the cost of getting those things funded is to give giveaways to the industries creating the problem. So this bill did not have an organized opposition because the oil industry got huge gifts in this bill. Now, you can say that that's a good short-term politics, but I would argue if the oil and gas companies are happy about a bill, then it is not a bill that is seriously taking on the climate crisis. I would argue to you that if the health insurance companies are happy about a health care bill, then you are not fundamentally taking on the problem in the healthcare economy. And on the list goes. So I guess the point is that we are in a situation where neither party is willing to make any kind of choice that asks the powerful economic actors creating problems to sacrifice anything at all. And you cannot fundamentally and systemically solve those problems unless you challenge the interests creating those problems.
I think that is very well said and very important point for people to reflect on as this week comes to a close. David Sordo, great to see you. Thank you so much.
So I just thought that was a pretty good, nuanced take on the whole situation, right? They acknowledge, yes, it might have some marginally good things in it, but that is not nearly enough, and you cannot call it a climate bill if the fucking oil companies are supporting it or happy about it. It's a joke. It's a joke, right? Anyway, David does great reporting. For those of you who are not familiar with his work, The Lever is his outlet. He and a number of fantastic reporters over there. Make sure that you go follow them. I use their work quite a bit, and David does a fantastic job of calling out the corruption in D.C. So the other angle that I wanted to bring up about this is no, here it is. Okay. The IRS receiving more funding, right? Now, David kind of mentioned it in that clip. that one of the provisions in this bill is $80 billion going to the IRS for further enforcement. Now, there's a few things to say about this. The IRS historically has gone after poor and middle class people because those people don't have the funds to bring on all the legal teams and all the legal battles. So it's much cheaper and easier to audit poor middle class people than it is to audit the wealthy and corporations and, you know, these conglomerates. So the IRS has long kind of said we need the resources to go after those big dogs. So, of course, you kind of find yourself in a conundrum here when you start talking about giving them any funding to do that, right? Because one can easily say, well, they need these resources to go after the wealthy, to have the resources to deal with the legal battles that the wealthy will put up. But then there's the easy retort of, but they historically have not gone after the wealthy, so why are we giving them more resources, right? The, of course, easy solution would have been to mandate in the bill exactly who these resources are supposed to go to auditing. But they didn't do that. They just threw $80 billion in resources to the IRS. So this has created all sorts of questions and controversy about how those resources will be utilized. And I want to show you guys a thread here, or a couple of tweets anyway, by Brianna Joy Gray that I think gives the most charitable interpretation, just to be totally fair, of the situation and what positives it might bring. She says, when the IRS was funded at the levels we're returning to, the rich were taxed more. Quote, millionaires were 80% less likely to be audited in 2018 than they were in 2011. Audits of millionaires recouped just $1.9 billion in 2018, down from $5.1 billion in 2010. She carries on here, I'm a little concerned about enforcement follow-through as well, but the best argument is when the IRS was better funded, the rich were taxed more. So that's just to give you that side of things. I also just want to be really clear. I actually meant to say this up front. Of course, we here at Real Progressives are very fervent in our framing things from an MMT perspective, and MMT teaches us that taxes do not actually fund spending. So a lot of the controversy surrounding the IRS, the increase in funds for the IRS, is sort of, framed disingenuously or deceitfully, where people are saying we need that money to pay for things, so we need to go audit the wealthy so that we can bring in more taxes. That part is utter nonsense and is harmful framing, and I just want to put that out front. But we also, as progressives, as leftists, very much believe in increasing taxes on the wealthy who have gotten away with taking over our society. So you tax the wealthy to try to decrease their power and decrease the inequity in our society, among a whole nother, number of other reasons. But there's Brianna making the case that it is literally true that when the IRS had more funding, they did go after the wealthy more than they do now. But I think it's fair to question, based upon the trends over recent decades, what the IRS will do with this increase in funding. I wish it would have just been mandated in the bill. It would have been very easy to do, but they negated to do that. So, we'll cover going forward what ends up happening. I'm sure there will be reporting on where those funds are directed. But the other angles were they were going to potentially go after like servers for tips and shit like that, or people for Venmo transactions or these kinds of things. And I think that would be very harmful and unnecessary. But my position on increasing resources for the IRS will obviously be solely determined based upon what those resources actually go to. And at this point, it's a little bit hard to tell what they're actually going to do with it. So I hope that they use it to go after corporations and the wealthy, which they have long claimed they don't have the resources to do. I am not naive enough to expect them to, but we will keep up on that story going forward as well. So, and once again, you guys, taxes do not fund spending. Get that idea out of your fucking heads. Realprogressives.org for all sorts of great content on MMT. If you do not know the basics of MMT, please do go to realprogressives.org and educate yourself on macroeconomics and why it's important to understand how federal finance functions. Also, The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton is a wonderful primer if you have not read it. Just wanted to put those plugs in really quick. So, student debt. This has obviously been a prominent topic throughout the Biden administration. He has suspended student debt payments a couple of times, if I'm not mistaken, but he has refused to actually cancel the debt, which is what everybody's asking for. This in The Hill. It's by Brad Dress. Cardona says Biden administration will announce decision on student loan payments in the next week. Education Secretary Miguel Cardona on Sunday said the Biden administration will announce a decision on whether to extend a pause on federal student loan debt in the next week, butting up against the current deadline on August 31st when the current moratorium on loan payments expires. Cardona told moderator Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press that the announcement was forthcoming but declined to share any other details. Quote, "We know August 31st is a date that many people are waiting to hear something from," the secretary said. "We've been talking daily about this, and I can tell you the American people will hear within the next week or so." Okay. I think, this is just my interpretation, I think they're playing fucking politics. I think they're trying to make this, if they're going to extend the moratorium or cancel any portion of student debt, I think they want to do it as close to the midterms as possible. That's me. I'm a little bit cynical. I think that's what they're doing. And I think that's shameful because there are a lot of people right now that are wondering if their payments will have to resume come August 31st. And those people are now in deep stress, right? It's not like they only start caring about that August 31st. So this administration acknowledging there, his quote said, "We know a lot of people are looking at August 31st and worried about August 31st and expecting a decision by August 31st, but we're just going to drag it out another week." I mean, it's just, morally reprehensible is what it is. But we'll see what they decide to do. I think they might be just scared enough to at least extend the moratorium, but that also kind of just extends stress, right? Like, will I be able to pay my bills and my rent in 6 months? Is that really actually doing this humongous favor for the American people? It's obvious we should cancel student debt. And, the argument that this would only help the uber wealthy, let me let you in on a little secret, you guys. The uber wealthy don't take out debt to go to college. They pay for it up front, okay? And if we're going to cancel all the debt, I don't care if that also happens to benefit some people that are well off. I want the benefit for poor and working class people. Did you know 40%, if I have that number right, of people with student debt didn't even finish their degree? 40%. We're acting like these are rich elites or something that we're doing a favor to. I think all of that rhetoric is completely disingenuous, and actually even more than disingenuous. It's just false. It's just wrong. It's deceitful. So anyway, we should cancel student debt for a whole plethora of reasons, and I know my audience probably agrees with that. I wanted to show you guys also a little thread here from Cancel Student Debt. Or I'm sorry, the Debt Collective. Read the first line there. Cancel student debt. Quote, "Wow, what's next? Canceling medical debt?" Yes. They carry on. "Well, golly gee, Wilkers, should we just have free lunch too?" Yes. "You people are entitled. What else should we do? Cancel credit card debts?" Yes. I just love this, you guys. This is the correct, I tweeted this out earlier, this is the correct response to right-wing fear-mongering about quote-unquote entitlement programs and the social safety net. You just say, yes, of course. What are you, some kind of monster that doesn't want to help people? Yes. They try to get all hyperbolic. Well, what they think is hyperbolic. I think that's actually what's most ironic about this is they're kind of acknowledging that they think it would be ridiculous to cancel medical debt. What are you admitting, right? I mean, you turn that right back around on him. You think people should be in debt for health care? The fuck is the matter with you? I really loved that thread. Wanted to make sure to bring it to you guys. We will see what happens here this week. According to the Education Secretary, we will know this week what's going to happen as far as the student debt payment moratorium. I anticipate they'll extend the moratorium but not cancel any debt and just continue to play this nonsense. They want the political benefit come the midterms, so they'll extend the moratorium so that people aren't literally like in further economic hardship than they already are right when we're going into the midterms. But I don't think they're going to cancel any significant portion, as Biden obviously promised on the campaign trail. At different times, he said he would cancel $10,000 or $50,000 per borrower of student loan debt, and he has obviously not done anything close to that. This also is obviously something, and we've covered this ad nauseum, that he could do by executive order. He does not need Congress's approval. He cannot say, but mansion, but cinema. He could do this with the stroke of a pen, and he has refused for, what are we at now, you guys? What, 2.5 years or a year and a half? My math's all fucked up. I was at work all day. Whatever it's been. He took office in 2020, right? So 2.5 years. And he has refused to follow through on that promise among a whole myriad of others. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about Liz Cheney here. And I know, I'm sure you guys have been following this, but it never ceases to amaze me how the Democrats will like deify right wingers simply because they said something bad about Trump or they opposed Trump in some very specific regard, usually to do with the Stop the Steal nonsense. It's amazing how Trump has become like a dividing line in and of himself in American politics. Where it's like, I really, people these days don't seem to care much about your partisanship or your actual policy views or like anything along those lines. What they want to know is your opinion of Donald Trump. If you dislike Donald Trump, then we can get along. And if you like Trump, then we cannot get along, or vice versa. It really just seems like that is a prominent dividing line in American politics. And I think that is completely sad. It's a satire of politics. It's our two-party system and corruption, rank corruption taken to the nth degree. This is like, it's cartoonish. But it does seem to be a sincere dividing line for a lot of people in this country, and I just think that's really sad. To the extent that someone like Liz Cheney, you guys, voted with Donald Trump 93% of the time. 93% of the time she votes with him, and the liberals are like, oh, anti-Trump queen. She votes with him on voting rights, and liberals are like, oh, she's here to save our democracy. It's just clown behavior. And it reveals how cultish our political, institutions in this country are. And I think, again, I think it's interesting that it's not even so much the parties that seem to dictate this, right? Look at Liz Cheney's dad. Openly, this is well documented, you guys, was one of the main people involved in stealing an election. Liz Cheney opposes voting rights. Democrats, oh, she's here to save our democracy. Votes with Trump 93% of the time. Oh, she's anti-Trump. I mean, I'm going to lose my fucking mind, you guys. I'm going to lose my fucking mind. Watching them rehabilitate George W. Bush, watching them, I mean, it never stops. It never stops. Dick Cheney is like one of the worst human beings alive. His daughter supports everything the man has ever done. He's a corrupt, deceitful, capriciously malevolent war criminal. She supports everything the guy does. He steals an election, and the Democrats are like applauding over here. It's so fucking pathetic, you guys. It is so fucking pathetic. And then they wonder why people like look at them like a clown show, because they're a fucking clown show. And of course, the mainstream media is happy to pick this up. They'll describe Liz Cheney as moderate. I mean, can you even imagine? Moderate? That's moderate? Votes with Trump 93% of the time. Moderate Republican. You see how Trump is just the only dividing line that seems to matter to most people that comment on politics now? If you oppose Stop the Steal, then you're anti-Trump and you must be a moderate Republican. Utterly insane. Utterly insane. And I couldn't miss the opportunity to talk about that, though I'm sure you guys have been keeping up with it, and I'm sure you've heard many things similar to what I've just said. But do not support Liz Cheney. You, in fact, do not have to support right-wing fucking maniacs just because they say a bad thing about Trump every now and again, okay? And I wanted to close here, you guys, on an uplifting and happy story. I usually do a longer labor update, but we're just going to keep it to one quick one today. This is in NPR. Starbucks must rehire 7 Memphis employees who supported a union, a judge says. They're known as the Memphis 7. I'm sure a number of you have kept up on this as well. A federal judge in Tennessee has ordered Starbucks to offer to reinstate 7 fired baristas following a union organizing drive at a store in Memphis. The employees referred to as the Memphis 7 were fired following an in-store media interview about the store's organizing efforts earlier this year. Starbucks said this violated company policy, but the union, Starbucks Workers United, claims this was all in retaliation for the union drive. Officials with the National Labor Relations Board, the federal agency responsible for enforcing U.S. labor laws, viewed this as retaliation as well and brought the coffee giant to court. U.S. District Judge Cheryl Lippman said Thursday agreed, saying Starbucks failed to prove that it enforced similar company policies elsewhere and in similar situations. Lippman said in her order that the NLRB, quote, provides evidence consistent with the theory that Starbucks discriminatorily applied its policies to the Memphis 7 when terminating them. Starbucks has to offer those workers their jobs back within 5 days, Lippman ordered. The company also must expunge those employees' disciplinary actions and cease and desist from any other anti-union practices. A small win here, you guys. Starbucks has gone so far in their blatant union busting that even the gutted NLRB is starting to push back pretty consistently against their anti-union firings. So this is wonderful news. I have reached out to a couple members of the Memphis 7, and I hope to hear back soon to bring you guys an interview with them to share their experience with you. I don't know if I'll hear back, but I would love to bring them on and share what Starbucks has done to them. There are obviously also a number of other Starbucks employees from around the country. These have caught a lot of media attention. We've covered them. I'm sure you guys kind of know what I'm talking about, at least in a general sense. It's been egregious and just universal, their union busting. They've also refused to negotiate in good faith, even though they said publicly that they would negotiate in good faith with stores that had voted to unionize. It's now been probably a year since those stores started to unionize. My timeline might be a little bit off. Correct me in the comments if anybody happens to know, but it's been at least half a year, like many, many months, and I think it really was last summer that this all picked up, maybe even spring. So these successes started to happen a long time ago. Starbucks said, we'll negotiate in good faith. Guess what? They haven't. But this is some good news, a court ordering them to reinstate the Memphis 7. Hope to bring you one of them soon for an interview, and we'll keep up on those stories with labor updates going forward. I just wanted to keep the show a little bit short since I'm on so late tonight. And with that, I want to thank you all for tuning in. Once again, please go to realprogressives.org to learn more about us, realprogressives.org/donate. I hope you all will tune in tomorrow for Joy's show that will be weekly on Monday nights going forward. Make sure to hit the like and subscribe, leave a comment, and share our content widely. It helps us to combat the algorithms. And with that, I hope you all have a fantastic week, and I will see you next week, hopefully at the normal time. I'm trying to get you guys back to that normal time of 5 Eastern, but my work schedule has been uncooperative as of late. So anyhow, whatever it may be, I'll see you guys next week. Hope you have a fantastic week.